Fáilte. Welcome to the Village Oak Tree. I'm your host, Terrance Ó Domhnaill. Thank you for joining me. So where I'm at right now, it's cold and wet outside, so I've got kind of a warmer shirt on today. I think it's a sign that winter is coming, not too far down the road. But that also means the United States and the world is at a crossroads, and things are starting to get violent everywhere. I've decided to move away from this idea of the U.S. states seceding, as it doesn't make economic sense. But changes need to be made if the U.S. is going to survive. The same could be said for Europe and the Middle East. The world is on the cusp of another global conflict, and unless the economic issues being raised by the people are addressed, a larger war will break out. So gather around, sit you down somewhere comfortable for a bit as I take more of a look at what's changing in the U.S. and abroad. So this is a question that's being raised online, social media, and independent news media and all kinds of stuff. Is the U.S. heading for another civil war? Most Americans are now aware that Trump and company are working to do away with any government-sponsored healthcare system. From Medicaid to Obamacare, Trump wants to stop the federal government from paying for any of it. In his first term, he gutted Obamacare, and in his second term, he's all but eliminated all of it except the name. The same for Medicaid. The cruelty of their plan is that the Medicaid cuts won't take effect until the end of 2026, after the midterm elections. So for people living in nursing homes because they're unable to take care for themselves on their own, they'll be out on the streets once that money is gone. My late mother would have been one of those. She passed away back at the end of 2021 from COVID, but she had been a permanent resident of the memory care unit since 2014 until she passed away at age 93. Some would say that it was her time, but to die of COVID in a nursing home? Come on, there was no excuse for that. But we're not here to talk about my late mother. We're here to talk about all the other senior citizens in nursing homes across the country that may end up on the streets by January of 2027. The U.S. already has a massive homeless problem that's getting worse by the month. Now you want to add into that mix all these poor nursing home residents that will no longer have any means to fund their care. That's how Medicaid works for poor seniors like my late mother. The residents are required to use up all their assets, down to $10,000 limit to pay for funeral expenses, to include the sale of all their material assets. This includes their homes, cars, furniture, extra clothing, and anything else no one else in the family wants. Once the guardians have proved to the state that there are no more assets left to sell off, then the application for Medicaid kicks in to cover their expenses until they pass. If any of the children of these seniors are expecting an inheritance, sorry, you just lost it all to the government. The bottom line is that do not put your parents in a nursing home if you want an inheritance. Hire home nurses, which is a lot cheaper. The downside is that your senior relative will have to live with someone. There are insurance policies that can be purchased for just about anything these days. Senior memory loss care, health care policies of all kinds for about any age, pet health insurance, children's life insurance, which creeped me out when I was a kid, when I learned my parents had one of those for my brother and I years ago. Term life insurance, and so on. The insurance corporations are betting on people's lives in order to make a lot of money. When people become too much of a risk, such as living in an extreme weather-prone area, they will drop customers in a heartbeat. Well, this mostly applies to home ownership. This also applies to health and life insurance. They can and have denied coverages for people with chronic illnesses, age, and other risk factors that may cause them to have to pay on a claim. If you file too many claims, first, they will raise your premiums. Then if you continue to be a liability, they drop you like a hot pan. A lot of people don't understand how all this works, especially those people who immigrated from another country. For example, my wife is from China. She grew up and lived there during the Cultural Revolution times and the aftermath. Because of the authoritarian government, she immigrated to the U.S. several years ago. She doesn't want to go back as she values her First Amendment rights that China doesn't offer. Although she's questioning some of that these days with everything Trump is doing. She's starting to see some parallels to what she lived through in China happening here in the US. A couple of nights ago, the subject of health insurance for our little dog came up again. He's got something going on that's making him scratch a lot lately. And no, it's not fleas. Trust me, she treats this little toy poodle like one of her own kids. We switched out flea collars, and he seems to be doing better. But I digress. Pet health insurance. It's expensive, and few can afford the monthly premiums. Most poor people who love their pets as much as we do have to wait until it's an absolute emergency before bringing their pets to the veterinarian, then pay out of pocket, which is really expensive, or put the pet down, which you still have to pay for. My wife wanted me to upgrade the current wellness care pet insurance we have now to something akin to a human health insurance plan. They are available, but wicked expensive. So I talked her out of it. It took me a few minutes to try and explain to her about how expensive these plans are, how our regular pet clinic might not accept this new insurance, and how much we could expect to pay out every month. After comparing how healthcare in the U.S. works as compared to other developed countries, a light bulb came on her head, and it was not a happy light. In China, they have a sort of national healthcare program, and outside of the major cities like Beijing and Shanghai, the quality of the healthcare is dependent on what you can afford to pay. They don't have much in the way of quality control. So if you end up with a quack doctor out in some rural area, oh well. It's still way cheaper than healthcare in the US, though. In Europe, most countries in the EU have national healthcare systems where the citizens and even foreign visitors don't have to pay for anything, unless you want something special. The citizens pay more taxes to cover this, but at least they have it. Canada has a national healthcare system, which the citizens pay for with a special tax called the GST, or General Services Tax. Depending on the country, the quality of the healthcare varies. In Canada, the UK, and some East European countries, the quality is subpar or poor in rural areas. Ireland is suffering from a lack of medical personnel, which is bringing their healthcare quality way down. Do I think the American model is better? I used to, but not anymore. The United States is also suffering from a loss of skilled medical personnel, especially in the poorer states and rural areas. It didn't used to be like this, but now, with Trump and the MAGA Republicans degrading the country, doctors and nurses are leaving for greener pastures. Doctors and nurses, especially those who have specialty skills, are leaving for other countries where they can practice medicine without the ideologues breathing down their necks, restricting them from taking care of their patients under the HIPAA laws. A lot of American doctors and nurses are immigrating to other states that don't restrict them. There are more after the MAGA people took over that are leaving the U.S. altogether to practice medicine in countries that welcome them with open arms, such as Canada and Europe. Canadian hospitals are actively recruiting American medical personnel and scientists who have lost their jobs or are looking for a place to work without the politicians stopping them over their religious ideologies. This especially applies to obstetricians and gynecologists. Europe and China have also extended the welcome mat to skilled Americans who've lost their jobs due to Trump's purges or the hospitals closing down due to a lack of money, which is also happening a lot more frequently now under Trump. Rural clinics and hospitals are closing up left and right due to a lack of money to operate. With the loss of Medicaid, there'll be a lot more in the very near future. Then there's the politics. Doctors and nurses, scientists and educators, as if they don't have enough to worry about now, are now under the gun for any public comments they make in the classrooms, hospitals, and on social media that the Trump government doesn't like. They're being fired or punitively punished by their employers if they say anything about the genocide in Gaza against the Israelis, or the latest thing, making derogatory comments about the late Charlie Kirk. It's no wonder these professional people are leaving the country for greener pastures abroad. When another country or overseas company will offer sign-on bonuses, relocation assistance, and other perks, plus a better standard of living, Why wouldn't someone just up and leave? There is a serious brain drain happening in the US right now. A lot of fired federal workers have found new jobs in Canada and Europe in the last few months. A lot of them are relocated to friendlier states. I'm wondering if I might have to sell my house and relocate back to New England to escape the MAGA Republicans someday soon. There's a lot to process these days as we watch the news and see what Trump is doing to the U.S. Umar Haque has written another good article about the parallels between Germany in the 1930s and the United States in 2025. Are we behaving like good Americans, as he puts it, as we watch Donald Trump and his MAGA crew destroy democracy here in the U.S.? We now have institutions who are so afraid of Trump that they're ratting on their educators and administrators to the government over subversive language, reminiscent of the McCarthy days of the early 1950s. Anyone deemed to have used anti-Semitic language in the U.S. now is being put on a list, and the list given to government censors. Little Marco Rubio is revoking visas of all kinds, green cards, and maybe even naturalized citizenship for accusations of anti-Semitism or opposition to the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestine. They're screening social media of all visa applicants and immigration applications for any mention of pro-Palestine or derogatory comments about the Israelis. On top of that, a U.S. congressman, I forget his name, but he's from Florida, is introducing a new bill that will outlaw any speech regarding pro-Palestine or the denigration of Israel. That will also apply to native-born citizens. The bill wants to strip citizens of their American passports for any speech they don't like. So, if you're accused of knowingly aiding, assisting, abetting, or otherwise providing material support to an organization that has been designated a foreign terrorist organization, they can strip American citizens of their passports if this bill is passed. This can be interpreted to include speech in anti-war activism. Now, I mentioned this from a couple of days ago, but as of yesterday, a senator has stripped that provision out of this bill. So whether it's going to pass now or not, probably, maybe not. But it just goes to show you the mentality of these people and what they're pushing for. On top of all that, we're watching the slow dismantling of the U.S. media by MAGA Republicans. They're taking over the majority of the largest legacy media corps and censoring what they can publish. They're shutting down, using lawsuits, independent news media. They don't like their content. It's not a complete takeover yet. They've made a lot of headway towards a complete censorship of mainstream media in the U.S. When you're a billionaire with more money than you can spend on yourself in your lifetime, why not spend it on buying up media corporations so you can control what the people hear in the news? It's worked for dictators like Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un. So why not Donald Trump and his billionaire pals? More and more, Trump and company are isolating the country, walling it off from the world. And if you want access, you have to pay. Whether it's a tribute to avoid massive tariffs or huge increases in fees for visas just to play tourist or legally work for a bit, in the new America, it's pay to play. Most people have by now heard about the massive ICE raid on the South Korean Hyundai battery plant they're helping to build in Atlanta, Georgia. ICE arrested nearly 500 people, mostly from South Korea. They were all Hyundai employees, which included a handful of Chinese and Japanese skilled workers trying to set up the new EV battery plant. They were all in the U.S. on work visas, but apparently there was a mix-up and an administrative issue with the way the visas were set up. So ICE, working so hard to get their daily quotas, must have thought this was a gold mine to fill their daily quota of illegal immigrants, went in and scooped them all up. I have an article to share with you, but I also watched an interview with the lawyer for these people, and he told the host that it took a phone call from the president of South Korea directly to Donald Trump to get these people released back to South Korea. For someone who keeps yelling about how he wants foreign investors to build more factories in the U.S., the Americans sure have a funny way of making that happen. When asked, only one of the workers agreed to stay. All the rest went home via a private jet sent from South Korea. They want nothing to do with the United States anymore. So will this factory ever open someday? Doesn't look good without any skilled technicians from Hyundai. With the way this kind of news gets around the world fast these days, there are a lot of foreign corporations looking at this and asking the same question. Will my employees also be swept up in ICE raids if I send them to the US? Now Trump wants to make allowances for skilled workers like these Koreans to avoid this problem in the future. I think that ship has sailed. Even if a foreign company should wish to set up shop in the US now, they'll have a real hard time convincing their workers to travel to the US on any type of work visa. Which segues into another failing segment of the US economy: tourism. Foreign tourism and international college applications have cratered since Trump's SS troops started arresting foreign students for free speech violations, jaywalking citations, and any other minor interaction with local police during their stay in the U.S. Foreign visitors have been locked up in gulags for weeks for visa administrative errors or the suspicion that they're working in the U.S. without a valid visa, work visa, or permission slip. There are green card holders being rounded up and having their green cards revoked. There was a shooting at a checkpoint just out of Chicago a few days ago when an immigrant decided to make a run for it and hit an ICE agent. The agent shot the man through his car door, apparently, as he was being dragged by the car. This is not going to be an isolated incident going forward if ICE is setting up road checkpoints. I told my wife a few months ago when we were preparing for our cross-country trip last spring that if we heard about any ICE checkpoints on our primary interstate routes, I would do my best to go around them for her safety. This is the United States we live in now. Even Russia isn't this bad to live in. This is more like North Korea. International visitors are now scared to come to the U.S. for any reason. Students are applying to universities in other safer countries like Canada and Australia. Travelers are going anywhere but the U.S. now. Foreign business people are refusing to attend meetings on U.S. soil out of fear of the ICE SS troops. Because of this fear, the tourism industry in the U.S. is collapsing. There are a lot of branches of this industry, such as restaurants, hotels, entertainment venues, taxis, and so much else. As it stands now, these businesses that depend heavily on foreign tourism now have to suck it up and entice Americans to pick up the slack. And with the economy crashing, that's not going to happen. Most Americans can't afford to take expensive vacations anymore. Then there's the universities. Almost all of them heavily dependent on international students. Now that these students and visiting faculty are going elsewhere for their safety, the higher education institutions are going to be losing billions in foreign tuitions and speaking fees from international professors. These losses won't be felt right away, but it will hit across the board within the next few months. Add to that all the consumer woes of higher prices and rising inflation that's just starting to hit. Trump's economic stats will take a big hit by the end of the fourth quarter here in 2025, especially during the end of the year holiday rush, or what used to be the holiday rush. It's looking like there will be a lot of near empty Christmas trees due to the tariffs on Chinese-made plastic toys this year, and maybe for a few years to come. The last bit of bad news I have this week is the state of the farming industry in the U.S. now. It's harvest season across the heartland, and there has been a lot of publicity through the independent news media coming from Arkansas. But they're just the example of farmers all over the country. They're all going belly up, or most of them anyway, due to the loss of their overseas markets. The soybean harvest has little to no buyers. The rice harvest has no foreign buyers anymore, and so on. China, who was once upon a time America's largest soybean and rice customer, has shut all that down. The American farmers are losing money hand over fist now, and a large percentage of them have been operating in the red for the last 4 years or more, according to this interview I watched. All due to Donald J. Trump and his economic war with China and the world at large. This war, by the way, started back during Trump's first term. Joe Biden did little to avert this as he kept the war going, and here we are. There's no longer any doubt for those of us who've been watching this for the last 10 years. The United States is bankrupting itself. It was a slow roll before 2016, but that's now escalated to the point of no return. I blame both political parties for all of this, and I seriously doubt they'll do anything to fix this in time. The national debt notwithstanding, The U.S. is no longer bringing in enough revenue to even pay the interest on the principal. This is one of the main reasons why this debt keeps rapidly going up every month. With Trump destroying the reputation of the United States with its creditors around the world, the end is near. France just had their credit rating downgraded severely over their national debt crisis, and it looks like the U.S. is going to follow soon. The Senate Democrats are talking seriously about a government shutdown to force concessions from the Republicans at the end of this month. Will they have the backbone to hold out? Last time they didn't. You know that Trump and the MAGA people will bring everything they have to bear down on them, probably even making personal threats against some of the weaker members and their families in private. That would be Trump's mafia style. I'm all done talking about the split up between the red states versus the blue states. I don't think it could happen, but I do predict an uptick in political violence ahead as we get closer to the midterm election period. I also predict that Trump will set up more National Guard troops in blue cities around the country. I predict the extreme gerrymandering of congressional districts to increase across the country as both political parties jockey for position to win the next couple of election cycles. What I hope to see is more Democrat-run state governments and federal Democrat Congress people do more to stand up to the authoritarians soon. We're running out of time. If Trump succeeds in setting up troops across the country in Democratic-led cities and manages to intimidate voters and accomplish other voter suppression tactics, then it might not matter who wins any of the elections next year. The United States may be a one-party state like Hungary, and it will be all over. The great American experiment will be finished. I don't know where all this is headed, but I do know that the biggest threat on the horizon is the economy. The economy drops into a major recession, the anger will come out in full fury. The politicians will have to seriously upgrade their personal security. Politicians, I mean both Democrats and Republicans. In the broader view, a recession will cause even more loss of confidence in American industries. And with the loss of confidence, investors will find other markets to invest in overseas. If the U.S. thinks they have money problems now, wait until no one wants to buy bonds or treasury bills anymore, or bring their factories to the U.S. over safety concerns and so on. Imagine a once mighty United States, now an impoverished empire along the lines of the U.K. That could happen by the end of this decade if things don't turn around very quickly. Is this how you see your future? If you don't want this to happen to you, get out there and fight for your civil rights and your democracy. Tell your members of Congress to get off their pampered butts and do what you elected them to do, which is to represent you in Congress, not to be Trump's bootlicking lackeys who only ask how high to jump when Trump asks, or a cowardly Democrat who's so afraid of losing their corporate sponsors that they roll over onto their backs in submission every time Trump or one of his people looks at them sideways. It's up to the people to take back the country from a mad king like Donald Trump. Congress isn't doing much as the members have too much to lose financially, personally financially. The federal judiciary is lackluster at best with its partisanship rulings, especially the Supreme Court. How many 6-3 decisions have we seen of late? I will use this platform to advocate for a peaceful revolution to take back our government from the wealthy elites. It's time to clean house in capitals across the country. It's time to fire all of those MAGA butt lickers and get rid of the Mad King in the White House. Just tell him he's fired and restricted to his golf courses with an ankle monitor until he dies, which probably won't be much longer. When you can't afford to both pay your utility bills and put food on your table this winter, think about this. Who's to blame for your poverty? It's not just the Republicans or just the Democrats. It's both. It's time to fire these rich elites and hire a whole new slate to start over. This time, maybe we elect farmers, loggers, fishermen, and factory workers instead of rich college boys who likely never got dirt under their fingernails a day in their lives. Maybe then we can actually get something done for the people. So it's time for my break. When I return, I'll read another chapter of The Priest by Michael Campy. I want to take a couple of minutes to explain how you can support what I'm doing here, either through a direct donation, a subscription, or purchasing my book. First, let me say I don't monetize my work up front, but I'm not adverse to asking for donations of any amount or currency on my website for paid subscriptions to my Substack page if you have the ability to do so. My annual or monthly subscription rates are as low as Substack will allow, if that helps. If nothing else, like, follow, restack, or sign up for a free subscription and share with anyone you wish to add my voice to the many in the independent media who don't like what's happening to people around the world. I may not be able to join any street protests, but I can surely protest here. I appreciate everyone who tunes in to watch, listen, or read my thoughts about how all of this is affecting us. I realize that I'm just one voice among the many, but that's how a rebellion gets its start. We start by raising our collective voices to be heard loud and clear by those who would attempt to take away our rights and freedoms. Americans had one rebellion in the 1770s to stop a tyrant, and we can always start another one. In Ireland, they've had many rebellions through the centuries to stop the tyrant kings of the past, so my ancestors have a lot of experience with that. Let me finish up by showing you this little video about my dystopian fiction story I wrote, Fugitives in the United States. If this story sounds interesting, go to any major book retailer around the world to order it, or order a hardcover or paperback version on my website and read it for yourself. The way things are starting to go in the US, the story may not be fiction for much longer. Watch this video and decide for yourself if you think this story is starting to become a reality now.
James had one dream: to save lives. But in a country torn apart by hate and fear, his own life became the ultimate battle. A new government driven by prejudice. A system that left no room for those like him. Immigrant, Muslim and brown skin. Forced to abandon his life and live as a fugitive, he fought to survive in a country that saw him as an enemy. Every step brought new risks and unexpected alliances. But in the darkest moments, love found him. And together, they discovered that even in a state of despair, hope could still bloom. This is the story of one man's fight for freedom, survival, and love.
Welcome back. So let me bring up Michael's latest chapter here. And as always, I'll pull it out here. Let you kind of maybe read along if you're watching this. I'm going to scoot over here and I'll read this, kind of give people an idea of what things could look like in the future. Things keep going the way they are. The Priest, formerly known as Bob, Part 45 by Michael Campy. Hillbilly Santa tells a story. The big man beckoned us to follow, and we fell in behind him. His troops swarmed around us, picking at our clothes, staring at Dolly. The dress seemed to fascinate them. We came to the doors of what used to be a resort hotel and walked in. The place was crowded with other people, all of whom were engaged in activities that looked a lot like what you would see in a movie about survivors of a zombie apocalypse. Some were building things, some were gardening, some were sewing clothes, some were reading. "Excuse me," I said to Santa. "Yes?" What are the reading people doing?" "They're preserving literature. We have collected books representing the sum total of human knowledge." "Why would you do that?" "Humans have not been very good at learning what they should have learned a long time ago. We want to make sure that doesn't happen again." We arrived at a long staircase that descended into an underground chamber. "This is our living quarters," said Santa. It stays relatively cool down here, but in the hotter parts of the year, even this gets a bit warm. It's been getting warmer down here a lot each year, and we might have to go deeper, although eventually it won't matter how deep we go. But now it's workable. The crowd that had been following us lost interest after a while, but the others we passed were staring, and that made us a little uncomfortable. We entered a room lit by candles with a large table in the middle that was piled high with food. Now, we were the ones steering because we couldn't believe that all the different kinds of food were still around. Let's eat. A bell was rung, and people began pouring in from the different rooms and sitting at the table. We sat at the side next to Santa. A small child sat at the head of the table. Doesn't the leader usually sit at the head of the table, Stuffy said. We put a different person at the head of each night. It helps avoid any type of misconceptions about who is in charge. Aren't you in charge? I'm one of many. My primary job is to greet folks like yourselves. A person of my size tends to discourage any notions of violence that someone would come here with. We look down on violence. Dolly looked up. How did you get here? That's a bit of a story if you'd like to hear it. Yes, 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 said Tiki. Santa smiled over at him. Let's go over to the couches. It'll be more comfortable there. The couches were arranged in the type of circle, as much as you can arrange rectangular objects in a circle, and it seemed as though it was designed to encourage conversation. So what's the story? Said Dolly. You're right impatient for a fellow wearing a dress. Do you like it? I think it sets off your ruddy complexion nicely. That's what I thought. Thanks, Dolly said. Can we hear the story? Said Tiki. Why, yes, you can, young man, he said with a smile. Tiki smiled back. Let's start way back before the collapse. Me and several friends of mine, people I had grown up with, had stayed in touch. We seemed to have noticed before anyone else that things were getting out of control. We decided that we should begin making a plan of sorts while we were still ahead of the curve. The first part of that plan was observing and paying attention. We already established that humans weren't very good at learning things, and their other failures was that they weren't very good at paying attention. There occurred at this time something that we called the quickening. Events were getting bigger, worse, and happening closer together, kind of like birth contractions. But what was being born was the rough beast slouching towards Earth to be born. We watched and we began to get ready. We each picked a skill set that we knew would be valuable in times like these and began practicing. We also watched migration patterns. We watched where people were going to get away from the ever more severe situations they found themselves in. The one big mistake that most of them made was that they didn't take into account the totality of occurrences. They thought if they just went somewhere that was currently safe, they would remain safe. Even before the apocalypse, they started to find out that it wasn't true. But most of them were heavily invested in their little ventures and were reluctant to admit to being wrong. We decided on here because of the altitude, even knowing it wouldn't protect us forever. It gave us a fighting chance, and it's worked out so far. About a year before the end, we all migrated up here, became part of the community, and started establishing ourselves. The biggest problem we encountered was the vast majority were ignoring the pandemic, so we had to remain somewhat insular to protect ourselves. We sought out others who understood the dangers of the out-of-control sickness. There weren't a lot of us, but our members became proportionally higher as more and more people started to suffer and get sick and die. We felt sorry for them, but they weren't going to change, so we pretty much crossed them off the list because we had ourselves to think about. It may sound selfish, but a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and as unfortunate as it is, we couldn't have any weak links. We didn't have to actively weed them out because they weeded themselves out. When a lot of people started dying, this place became safer and safer. We also understood that a lot of things that worked in the past weren't going to work in the future. That's another mistake other groups made. They thought all they had to do was pretend like they were living in the past and everything else would just magically fall into place. They hadn't counted on the natural foods dying off, the animals dying off, the water supplies being poisoned, and them being sick. It took them out pretty quickly. We stay safe here because we pay attention. Surviving now is a constantly morphing process, and the only way to keep going is to adapt to constantly changing conditions. We also understand that there's only so much adaptation available, and sometime, as yet undisclosed, we will no longer be able to adapt, and that's where you find us today, on the cusp of another adaptation that will keep us around for another year, a month, a week, or a day. People in the before times had an overblown opinion about their ability to deal with this new set of living arrangements. Some of them thought they would rather just die than suffer. Some of them thought they could just kill themselves and those they loved, and they were proven wrong, because it's one thing to think about it and another thing entirely to actually do it. Most of them weren't ready, and that made it a lot harder for them. So that's how we managed to keep things together. It may sound like a cult, but we call this place the Moment of Joy community, because we all know that each moment is quite possibly the last. And that's another thing some folks thought they had wrapped their minds around. Turns out that a state of equanimity is more difficult to achieve than the self-help books promised. And here we are. So that's all I have for you. Let me pull this down here. Gurma Haggett, thank you for watching or listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed it, and you'll return again to listen to the news and stories I find every week. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this quote by Thomas Jefferson. In questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Slán go foill.